Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we really try to cut through all the noise, the endless reports and data, and pull out what you actually need to know. Today, we're taking on a pretty big mission, looking hard at where things stand globally with gender equality.
Yeah, and it's not just if progress is happening, because, okay, it is, slowly.
Right.
But we're digging into the why. Why is it so slow? What are the kind of hidden costs and the structural things holding it back?
Exactly. We want to get past the headlines. We've got the big global reports, the latest numbers.
And we've paired that with some really specific research, particularly looking at the U.S., focusing on those immediate economic hurdles women are facing, like day-to-day stuff.
Things like childcare costs, right?
Huge factor.
Yeah.
Childcare, remote work policies, things that directly impact whether women, especially mothers, can actually stay in the workforce.
It's this paradox, isn't it? You see the overall trend globally. Things are getting better, generally speaking.
Definitely. The line goes up over time.
But then you see the projection, how long until we actually reach full parity? And the number is just staggering. Feels impossibly far away.
It really does. Like 123 years far away, based on the current speed, it tells you the current approach just isn't enough. Not by a long shot.
So we're going to unpack that. We'll focus on two main areas where things seem to be dragging the most. The economy and politics.
Yeah, that's where the biggest gaps are, globally speaking.
And like you said, we'll bring it down to earth with that U.S. research on childcare and workplace flexibility, real, concrete things affecting decisions right now.
To keep it organized, we're using that standard framework, the Global Gender Gap Index. It looks at 4 key areas.
Right, the 4 dimensions. Economic participation and opportunity,
Political empowerment,
educational attainment,
and health and survival. It gives us a consistent way to measure progress, or lack thereof, across, nearly 150 countries.
Yeah, it's a solid base. Okay, let's dive in. So starting with that big picture, the global view. After tracking this for almost 20 years, where are we? What's the overall score?
Okay, so globally, the gender gap is considered just under 70% closed.
70%.
Yeah, think of it like a journey. If parity is 100%, we've managed to cover about 69% of the distance across all those countries studied.
So nearly 2/3 of the way there. That does sound like real progress, I suppose. Hard-won progress.
It absolutely is. It represents decades of effort, policy changes, activism, real momentum.
But then comes that number you mentioned, the projection. If we keep going at this current pace, how long until we actually close that remaining 30-odd%?
That's the number that really hits you. 123 years.
Wow.
123 years. And that's based on the collective speed we've seen over the nearly 2 decades they've been tracking this.
So even with the recent improvements, maybe getting back towards the pre-pandemic trend?
Yeah, there was a bit of an uptick recently, suggesting recovery, but it barely dents that long-term projection. The overall pace is just incredibly slow.
123 years. Well, that's not in our lifetimes, not in our children's lifetimes, probably. Yeah. It basically says the current strategies are not enough.
Fundamentally inadequate for achieving parity anytime soon. And just to give that context, since 2006, when the index started, the total global improvement has been less than 5 percentage points.
Less than 5 points in almost 20 years.
Yeah, so we're talking fractions of a percentage point improvement per year, globally averaged out. Incremental doesn't even begin to cover it.
Okay. So let's break it down by those 4 areas, the sub-indexes. Where are we doing okay, relatively speaking, and where are the big problems?
Well, the good news, relatively speaking, is in 2 areas: education and health.
Educational attainment and health and survival.
Exactly. Both of those are over 95% closed globally.
95%. So in most places, the gaps in basic schooling, university access, life expectancy, general health, they're pretty small now.
Largely, yes. There are still pockets and specific issues, of course, but on the whole, access to education and basic health outcomes are close to parity in a lot of the world, which is a huge achievement.
Definitely something to acknowledge. But it makes the other numbers even starker, doesn't it? If education and health are mostly sorted, why is the overall average only 69%?
Because the other 2 areas are dragging it down dramatically. That's where the friction is.
Economic participation and opportunity and political empowerment.
Right. Economic participation is only about 61% closed, so a huge gap remains there.
Still almost 40% of the way to go on the economic front.
And politics. That's the furthest behind by a long shot. Political empowerment is only about 23% closed globally.
23%. Wow. So less than a quarter of the way towards women having equal political power and representation worldwide.
It's a massive deficit. And these two lagging areas have vastly different projected timelines to reach parity.
Okay, so the 123 years is the overall average. What are the projections for just economics and politics?
Based on current trends, the economic gap is projected to take 135 years to close,
Longer than the average?
and the political gap, 162 years.
162 years. But hang on, I thought you said earlier, or the reports often say, that political empowerment has actually seen the most improvement since 2006, like the biggest percentage point jump.
It has, yeah. That's the confusing part. It's improved by about 9 percentage points since 2006, which is more raw progress than the other indexes.
So if it's moving fastest, why does it have the longest runway at 162 years?
It's because it started from such an incredibly low point. Imagine starting a race miles behind everyone else. Even if you run faster, you still have way further to go.
Ah, okay, so that 9-point gain is significant, but it's a gain on a baseline that was, what, maybe 14% back in 2006?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So even with the fastest improvement rate, the sheer scale of the remaining gap, the structural resistance to women in political power, means it'll take the longest to overcome at the current pace.
That makes sense. It's about the starting line, not just the speed. So who's doing well? Who's setting the pace?
Iceland, consistently.
Yeah.
For 16 years running now, they've been #1. And they're the only country that's closed over 90% of its overall gender gap.
90%. So it is possible to get close.
It shows it's possible. And generally, European countries, particularly the Nordics, dominate the top 10. They tend to have strong policies, social support systems.
Right. And on the other end, which regions are facing the biggest struggles?
The lowest scores tend to be in Southern Asia. They've closed around 65% of their gap, roughly.
Okay.
And the Middle East and North Africa region lags the furthest behind, only around 62% closed. These regions face really complex, deep-rooted challenges, both economic and social, that keep progress much slower.
So that sets the scene. Big gaps remain, especially in economics and politics, despite progress in education. Let's dig into that economic piece now.
Okay, so this section really gets to the heart of that contradiction we mentioned.
Yeah.
We've got the talent, the education scores are high, but the economy isn't fully leveraging it.
This idea of an untapped return on education investment. Can you break that down, especially when we see women enrolling in university at higher rates than men in many places? You mentioned North America, for instance.
Yeah, in North America, the enrollment rate for women in tertiary education, like university, is significantly higher than for men, maybe around 30 percentage points higher, which is huge.
So the pipeline is full of highly qualified women.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Highly skilled, ready to contribute at high levels. But then you look at senior leadership roles in the economy, and women are still hugely underrepresented. Globally, if you look at senior managers who have tertiary education, only about 3 out of 10 are women.
3 out of 10, despite often being the majority of graduates in some fields.
Precisely. So the skills are there, the investment in their education has been made by individuals, by families, by the state, but the system isn't allowing that investment to fully pay off at the highest levels of economic decision-making. It's a massive missed opportunity.
It's like building a fantastic engine, but then not connecting it properly to the wheels. What does that cost an economy?
The reports argue the cost is substantial. You lose out on diverse perspectives, potentially different approaches to risk, innovation, not to mention just basic fairness. It's human capital being underutilized.
Okay, so that's leadership. What about overall participation in the workforce? Are more women working?
The overall share is increasing, but very slowly. It's around 41% of the economies looked at recently.
So less than half.
Still significantly less than half, but maybe more importantly, it's where women are working. There's a strong clustering effect.
Clustering, meaning concentrated in certain sectors.
Yes. Women are heavily concentrated in fields like healthcare and care services, essential work, obviously, but where nearly 6 out of 10 workers are women.
Okay.
Education is similar. These are often called people-focused sectors.
And the issue with that clustering is?
Well, historically, these sectors have often been undervalued, underpaid, and may have less potential for, say, massive economic scaling or generating huge profits compared to tech or finance or heavy industry.
So even when women are participating, they might be channeled into sectors with lower average pay ceilings and maybe less influence on broader economic policy.
That's a big part of the structural challenge. It limits wealth accumulation and trajectory, even for those in the workforce.
And this connects back to that leadership pipeline problem you mentioned earlier. The path upwards seems blocked.
It does. We saw some gains in women reaching top management over the last decade, but that progress has noticeably slowed down since about 2022.
Slowed down. Why? What's happening there?
What's worrying is how it's slowing. In some industries, we're actually seeing the share of women in the very top jobs increasing slightly faster than the share of women getting promoted into middle management.
Wait, so more women at the very top, but fewer coming up through the middle ranks? That sounds unstable.
Exactly. It's unsustainable. You can't just parachute women into CEO roles without a strong, diverse pool of experienced managers coming up behind them. It suggests maybe companies are hitting diversity targets at the executive level.
Maybe for optics or due to pressure.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But they aren't necessarily building the deep internal pipeline needed to make those gains permanent and organic. You need that mid-level talent development for long-term sustainable diversity at the top. Otherwise, the pool dries up.
Fascinating. So a potential disconnect between top-level hiring and mid-level promotion. Okay, let's shift from internal company dynamics to external forces. Geopolitics, trade. How does that fit in?
This is a really critical and maybe underappreciated risk right now.
Yeah.
Historically, global trade integration, global supply chains, exporting goods, was actually a really positive force for women's economic participation, especially in developing countries.
How so?
It created millions of formal sector jobs. Think textile factories, high-value agriculture processing for export. Women moved from often precarious informal work into jobs with contracts, maybe better pay, more regulation.
Okay, providing stability.
Yeah, and the data backs this up. Women's representation is noticeably higher in firms that are plugged into these global value chains, about 33%, compared to firms that aren't, only about 24%.
But now we're hearing a lot about trade fragmentation, deglobalization, geopolitical tensions. What's the risk?
The risk is that those gains could be reversed. If global trade slows down or becomes more regionalized or faces more barriers, those formal jobs that women disproportionately rely on, especially in certain sectors, are directly threatened.
And is this risk spread evenly?
No, that's the key point. It's heavily concentrated among women in low-income economies.
Why them specifically?
Because of that clustering effect again, but on a global scale. In low-income countries, a huge majority of women workers, something like 72%, are in those tradable sectors like agriculture and manufacturing.
72%.
Compare that to high-income countries where it's only about 33% of women workers in those same sectors.
So a downturn in global manufacturing or agriculture trade hits women in poorer countries much, much harder.
Disproportionately harder. And we know from past shocks, like the pandemic's initial impact, that when women lose jobs due to these kinds of disruptions, it tends to take them longer to recover economically than men. The hit to their earnings and assets is often deeper and harder to reverse.
So trade policy isn't just about economics in the abstract. It's directly tied to gender equality outcomes, especially for the most vulnerable women globally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Policymakers need to see that connection clearly. Trade shifts have real gendered consequences.
Okay, that gives us the big picture on economic structures and risks. Now, let's zoom right in, down to the household level. You mention specific U.S. research on probably the most immediate pressing barrier for many working mothers, childcare.
Yes, this research really zeroes in on the cost of care for young children, specifically those under 5.
Why that age group?
Because that's the period of the most intensive care needs. You need more staff per child, the logistics are complex. It's when care is typically the most expensive and hardest to find, creating a real bottleneck for parents wanting or needing to work.
And what's the direct link between that cost and mothers' participation in the workforce?
It's a very clear, direct link. As childcare costs go up, mothers' labor force participation tends to go down. It acts as a major disincentive.
Makes sense. If the cost of putting your kid in daycare eats up most or all of your potential earnings.
Exactly. The net financial benefit disappears. You're essentially working just to pay for childcare, which for many doesn't make economic sense, even if they want to work for career or personal reasons.
And does this affect all mothers equally?
No, not at all. The impact is felt much more sharply by low-income mothers.
How so?
The research shows that when childcare costs increase, it causes a significantly larger drop in workforce participation among low-income mothers compared to middle or high-income mothers.
So $100 to $200 a month increase might be annoying for a higher-earning family, but for a family close to the edge, it can be the breaking point.
Precisely. For a mother earning a lower wage, that increase can make working financially impossible. It pushes them out of the workforce much more readily than it does higher earners who might have more buffer or find the non-financial benefits of working still outweigh the cost.
It creates this trap, doesn't it? You need the job for economic stability, but the cost of the childcare required to do the job makes it unattainable.
It's a classic economic bind. And it keeps low-income mothers, in particular, locked out of the potential benefits of formal employment, consistent income, career progression, retirement savings.
This brings up that really difficult policy challenge: quality versus cost. States regulate childcare staff ratios, group sizes, safety standards. That's crucial for quality, right?
Absolutely vital.
Hmm.
Especially in those first 5 years, quality care makes a huge difference for child development. Regulations are there to ensure kids are safe, learning, getting enough attention. Lower child-to-staff ratios, for example, are generally better for kids.
But every regulation aimed at boosting quality.
Tends to drive up the operational costs for the childcare centers. More staff means higher payroll. Smaller groups mean less revenue per classroom. Training requirements cost money.
So the very things we do to ensure kids get good care make that care more expensive for parents.
Exactly. It's a fundamental tension. Unless there's significant public funding or subsidies involved, the goals of high quality and broad affordability are often in direct conflict in the private childcare market.
Which is where most people in the U.S. get their care.
Right, leading to the affordability crisis we see.
Now, let's connect this cost crisis to workplace flexibility. The pandemic forced this huge, unplanned experiment with remote work. What did we learn from that, specifically regarding mothers?
We learned that flexibility can be a game changer, at least temporarily. The research looked at women who had babies right at the start of the pandemic, around March 2020.
Okay, when lockdowns were starting, remote work was suddenly widespread.
Exactly. And this group of mothers, compared to similar mothers who had babies just before the pandemic, actually had higher rates of labor force participation in the months that followed.
Higher participation, even with a newborn during a pandemic. Why?
Because the sudden availability of remote work made it much easier to manage what the researchers called the dual role, being both a mother and an employee.
So less need for expensive, full-time, out-of-home care immediately. More ability to juggle feeding schedules, naps, work calls.
Precisely. It eased the logistical and financial burden enormously for that specific cohort who benefited from peak flexibility. It acted like a safety valve, allowing them to stay attached to the workforce through that critical early period.
It basically solved, or at least mitigated, that impossible choice between career and exorbitant childcare costs for a while.
For that group, yes. But here's the worry now.
The return to office mandates, RTO.
Exactly. As more companies require employees back in the office, often full-time, the flexibility that helped those pandemic-era mothers stay employed is disappearing.
And the risk is?
The risk, highlighted in the source material, is that those participation gains will be erased. Those same mothers might now face the stark choice again: find and afford full-time care, which is still incredibly expensive and hard to find, or drop out of the workforce.
So the structural problem snaps right back into place once the temporary flexibility is removed.
That's the concern. It suggests that without systemic changes, either much more affordable care or much more widespread, genuine workplace flexibility will just revert to the pre-pandemic status quo, where the structure itself pushes many qualified mothers out. That education investment gets wasted all over again.
Okay, let's shift back to that other major gap, political empowerment. We know it's the biggest deficit overall, looking at that 162-year projection. Why is it so persistent, even with some notable progress?
Well, the progress is real in terms of raw numbers. We have seen more women entering parliaments, getting appointed to government cabinets globally over the last couple of decades.
So, more seats at the table, literally.
More seats, yes. The share of women in national legislatures has gone up significantly, as has the share of women holding ministerial positions. The visible presence is definitely greater than it was.
But you're hinting there's a but. Is it about which seats they're getting?
That's a huge part of it. It's about the distribution of actual power within those governments. Women are still significantly underrepresented in the most powerful cabinet roles.
Meaning, which roles are we talking about?
Think about the ministries that control the money and the core functions of the state: economy, finance, defense, infrastructure, trade. The power portfolios. Women are much less likely to hold these positions.
And where do they tend to be concentrated?
More often in ministries dealing with social issues, health, education, family affairs, culture, sometimes specific women's affairs or equality ministries.
Important areas, obviously, but maybe not the ones holding the main purse strings or setting the overall strategic direction.
Often, yes. While vital for social well-being, these portfolios typically command smaller budgets and less influence over the major economic and security decisions of the country compared to, say, the Ministry of Finance.
And why does this unequal distribution within government matter so much for closing the overall gender gap, including the economic one we just discussed?
Because priorities follow power. If women aren't equally represented where the big budget decisions and strategic plans are made, then the resulting policies and investments are less likely to fully consider or address the specific needs and barriers faced by women. Like investing in a robust, affordable national childcare system, for example. That's a massive infrastructure project, really. But it might fall under a social ministry that lacks the clout to secure major funding compared to, say, a defense project. The lack of women in economic power roles means women's economic needs get underfunded.
This leads us right into what you called the most critical insight, the implementation gap. Tell us about that. It sounds important.
It's crucial. The implementation gap is basically the difference between what the law says and what actually happens.
Okay.
We can think of it as legal frameworks versus supportive frameworks. The legal framework is the law itself.
Right.
The Constitution guaranteeing equality, the Equal Pay Act, the parental leave law. It's the ambition written down.
Got it. The words on the page.
Right. The supportive framework is everything needed to make that law real. The funding allocated to enforce it, the government agencies tasked with oversight, the accessible court systems, the public awareness campaigns, the actual services provided.
So the infrastructure behind the law.
Exactly. And what the global data shows is a near universal implementation gap. Countries might have really progressive-sounding laws on the books.
But they don't put the money or the mechanisms in place to actually make them work.
Precisely. The supportive framework scores almost always lag way behind the legal framework scores. Lots of ambition on paper, very little follow-through in practice.
Are there any exceptions? Countries that are better at the doing than the saying?
Very few stand out. The report mentioned just 5, where the supportive score was actually higher than the legal score, suggesting a real focus on operationalizing things. Belize, Bangladesh, Canada, Jordan, and the UK were named.
Interesting mix. So it's not just about having the best laws, but about investing in making whatever laws you have effective.
That seems to be the key takeaway. Focusing on the budget, the enforcement, the access might be more important than just passing another law.
That really reframes the discussion. We should be asking less about if a law exists and more about how well it's funded and enforced.
Absolutely. Is there a dedicated agency? Does it have teeth? Can people actually access the system if their rights are violated? That's where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, let's tie this implementation failure back to the economy again. How does this lack of supportive frameworks like for parental leave or affordable care directly impact women's careers?
It shows up most clearly in career breaks.
Women taking time out of the workforce.
Yes, and disproportionately so. The data shows women are over 50% more likely than men to take a career break.
50% more likely. That's huge.
And when they do take breaks, primarily for parenting or caregiving responsibilities because the support isn't there, those breaks tend to be significantly longer.
How much longer?
On average, nearly 20 months for women compared to about 14 months for men who take breaks.
So more women taking breaks, and for longer stretches, the cumulative impact must be massive.
Devastating for careers and lifetime earnings. It stalls promotions, leads to skill depreciation, reduces retirement savings. It locks in economic inequality across the lifespan, right into old age.
It's that structural leakage we talked about, manifesting right there.
Exactly. And it leads to a clear conclusion. The care economy, childcare, elder care isn't just a social issue. It's fundamental economic infrastructure.
It needs to be treated like roads and bridges.
Precisely. Investing in robust, affordable care systems is an economic strategy. It supports workforce participation, boosts productivity, helps businesses retain talent, and, crucially, allows society to finally get the full economic benefit from all the investment made in educating women. Until that happens, the potential keeps leaking away. #tag outro.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, it feels like we've moved beyond just tracking progress. The real story is about the friction points.
Yeah, and that critical gap between intention and reality.
Yeah.
The implementation gap.
We see huge success in getting women educated, but then these massive roadblocks appear, especially in the economic and political arenas.
The 123-year timeline to parity isn't just slow. It's a sign that the current systems are failing to translate potential into power.
And things like the actual practical cost of childcare aren't just side issues. They are central economic barriers determining workforce participation right now.
Absolutely. The big takeaway for me is that closing the gender gap isn't just about passing more laws, the legal frameworks. It's about the hard, unglamorous work of building and funding the supportive frameworks.
Enforcement, accessible services, real budgets.
Exactly. And recognizing the political underrepresentation in those key economic ministries directly leads to underinvestment in things like care infrastructure.
Which then forces talented women out of the workforce, perpetuating the cycle. It's all connected.
It's a really tight loop.
So if we want to break that cycle and actually accelerate progress, get that 123-year number down significantly, the focus has to shift.
It has to shift to implementation, to funding care as infrastructure, and to demanding real, sustainable workplace flexibility, not just temporary pandemic measures.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. We have this moment right now, this demographic wave of highly educated young women entering the workforce, more skilled than ever before. It's a massive potential boom for economies everywhere.
Huge potential. But it's fragile. That potential can easily be squandered if these structural leaks aren't plugged, and fast. If childcare remains unaffordable, if return-to-office mandates eliminate flexibility without providing alternatives.
Then this generation faces the same old barriers. So the question we leave you with is this. Looking ahead, what specific changes will you watch for? What shifts in government budgets, in corporate policies around flexibility and parental support will tell you whether this incredible potential is finally being unlocked or if it's hitting the same old walls?